All right. So, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and giving some brief background information on what you do.
I'm a hydrologist with the Idaho Department of Water Resources, where part of my job is to track drought conditions across the state of Idaho.
All right. And so, what kind of qualifications, like where did you have to go to university and what did you study in order to get into that field?
I studied civil engineering at the University of Idaho and got a undergraduate degree there, a master's degree at the Boise State University in civil engineering, and then a PhD in water resources at the University of Idaho.
All right. And so, I guess the main topic of today's discussion would really just be this winter that we're having, because at least down here in Eastern Idaho, I know you're up there in Boise, it is different than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think it's different than anything the state's ever seen before.
So, has there been, at least in any recorded history that you're aware of, any similar winters or things you can draw connections
The
to?
closest connection we have is 1934, but the records back then are pretty limited. The measurement of snow across the western United States started in the late 30s. So we have very little data to go by as far as snow goes. But 1934 is our warmest year historically, and it was set by winter temperatures. I believe the summer was actually slightly cooler than normal. But the winter was incredibly warm. And this winter, we're just slightly warmer than 1934. And so I think we're probably on a trajectory to set a new temperature record, because the climate outlooks are looking like we'll probably be warmer than normal through January. And then, we'd have to have a really cool February and March to bring our winter temperature down below 1934. And then it's been rare to have summer temperatures below normal. And so combined together, I think, we're likely to have the hottest year on record in 2026.
Wow, that's concerning to know. In this past year, were there any signs or indications that this was coming?
No, we were looking at a weak La Nina, which typically results in cooler than normal temperatures, especially in northern Idaho and the state of Washington. It's a little bit more mixed, although we tend to be cooler than normal in southern Idaho. So we were expecting generally cooler conditions, and that just has not materialized.
You said a weak La Nina. What is that?
There's what they call the El Nino La Nina oscillation in the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean really drives precipitation across the Pacific Northwest and most of the western United States. And one of the kind of key events in the Pacific is this oscillation back and forth between El Nino and La Nina conditions, which are measured along the equator. So when you have warmer than normal conditions, because the winds slow down across the Pacific, so you get less updraft on the eastern side of the Pacific, our side of the Pacific. Then you tend to have a warmer than normal condition across the equatorial Pacific, and that leads to a really strong jet stream typically that brings a lot of moisture into the southwestern United States. A La Nina is the opposite of that. The winds pick up, and you get a lot of uplift from the Pacific, because there's the ocean has a circulation that's driven by the wind pattern, and so then the Pacific becomes cooler than normal at the equator, meaning there's less energy transfer between the North Pole and the equator, and so that typically results in a weaker jet stream. that tends to meander a little bit and perhaps even split. And typically that brings more moisture and cooler conditions up into Washington and northern Idaho, and brings in a lot of atmospheric river conditions that can hit various portions of the western United States. And so what we're seeing this year that's unusual is these atmospheric rivers have brought in there's been a lot warmer than normal. And I think our atmospheric river conditions are it seems to be more frequent than normal this year, although I'm not 100% certain on that. I'd have to talk to the Weather Service to verify.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but here in Idaho, we've kind of been in a state of drought for a couple years, haven't we?
Yeah, last year was kind of the beginning of a drought. We had a drought in 21 and 22. Then 23 wasn't too bad, and 24. But last year in 2025, especially Eastern Idaho, of course, Northern Idaho's been in drought for 3 years. Their conditions have been different from down here. But Eastern Idaho really kind of went deep into a drought last year, but they were in a good position to weather a drought because they had higher than normal reservoir carryover. But this year, we have about 500,000 acre feet less in the Snake River system than last year. And so we're going to need a pretty robust snowpack. And it looks like we're getting it in the upper Snake if conditions hold. If we go into a dry spell, and we are expected to have a dry spell for the next couple of weeks, hopefully that breaks and we continue to build snowpack. We might see drought ameliorated a little bit or the impacts weakened. The likelihood of completely coming out of drought is not high. We're not really expecting that at this point. We aren't expecting to see a lot of flood control. There's probably going to be no flood control operations on the Snake. Unless after this dry spell, we get some strong atmospheric rivers that really target Eastern Idaho, and then we definitely could start facing flood control conditions.
All right, so it sounds like how's the state doing for water storage then, I guess, comparatively to the previous years?
Eastern Idaho is behind schedule. Western Idaho is pretty normal, with a couple reservoirs that we split between Oregon and the Hawaii reservoir, which we split between Oregon and Idaho, is above normal, which is really good because they have no snowpack at all. So we expect that reservoir to be totally depleted by the end of the year. But they have a 2-year supply, so they should be able to get through this year. And then we're really not seeing much snowpack at all in Western Idaho. So we're expecting probably to be in a similar condition that Eastern Idaho was this year. So we're expecting to probably have lower than normal reservoir carryover at the end of the year. We shouldn't see too many drought impacts. We definitely will see some. The precipitation has helped because it's been normal, but we're missing a lot of snow, and if we stay dry for a long period of time, we'll definitely have some serious drought impacts. But assuming after this dry spell we go back to normal conditions, hopefully we'll be okay.
That's comforting to know. In the past, when I work a seasonal job for the Department of Soil and Water, so I work a lot with boaters and people who do water recreation and fishermen. So you don't expect any of that to be heavily impacted, at least based on the current situation we're in, as long as it doesn't get worse?
Well, Eastern Idaho, and I'm not a fisherman, at least not a reservoir fisherman. So I don't know what conditions are optimal, but I think what we'll see is a low chance of the reservoirs filling in Eastern Idaho, except Magic Reservoir and Mackey Reservoir. Right now they have a really strong snowpack, so they can weather a dry period for at least a month and still be at or above normal. So in all likelihood, they're going to have a strong snowpack. So those reservoirs will probably be in great shape for fishing. Eastern Idaho and Southern Idaho, we're going to probably see low reservoir conditions by the end of next year. And along the southern basins of Idaho, from the Salmon Tract out toward Bear Lake, we're going to see those reservoirs remain low, and I think they're low currently, although we don't have good data on the Oakley Reservoir, which may be in the best shape. But anyway, the Salmon Tract Reservoir is really low, and they're going to have a really rough year on the Salmon Tract.
Interesting. And what about hydropower? Do you think this will impact any Idaho hydropower facilities?
We have seen the ESPA come up the last couple of years because we had some good opportunities for managed recharge as well as just the natural recharge. Given the likelihood we won't have flood control operations, we should see the East Snake Plain aquifer decline and discharge from the aquifer decline, which is Idaho Power's main source of water supply for their reservoirs. So, but they're a little higher than they have been historically, so it won't be that terribly low. But especially the Hell's Canyon complex, with Eastern Oregon and Western Idaho being pretty dry, their aquifer portion will be okay, but their runoff out of the mountains is going to be limited, and so they'll probably have a little bit lower hydropower output. And then Avista in northern Idaho is going to struggle with power production this summer, unless they can get some solid mid-elevation snowpack. Well, actually, they're on the Coeur d'Alene and the Kootenai. They'll probably continue to struggle a little bit, but it might be better than last year. We'll kind of have to see how that plays out.
Well, that's good to know. I'm sure, looking outside, a lot of people are pretty concerned about the state of things.
Yeah, the real problem we're facing is just the warm conditions. And so I'm not too optimistic we're going to go back to normal. I'm beginning to get quite concerned about Western Idaho. I think Eastern Idaho, just because a lot of the basins on the north and eastern side of the basin are pretty high elevation. Their snowpack should be okay. And they should see limited impacts due to drought. The basins along the southern border of Idaho above Utah and Nevada, those are really struggling again. And so we're going to see some pretty low runoff out of those areas because those low elevation basins I doubt we're going to see much snowpack build up there. So there's a very, very steep gradient between the high elevation and the low elevation. And so even our mid elevation tends to be lower than average. So we just have this really steep gradient, and it's going to make water management pretty challenging. If we were to get a sudden cool and wet spring, water managers would be, and we were to move over toward flood control, we could see some pretty crazy flood control operations. But at this time of the year, it's hard to know where things are going to go, but we are leaning really warm. And so I think we're leaning a lot more toward drought than the other direction. I think we're going to see really low base flows this summer. It's hard to know exactly what it's going to look like, but it's not looking the best. Things can change. Nature has a way of playing tricks on us, but this one looks rough at this point.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today about this, for your information that you're willing to share with us.